Growing up in small-town Iowa wasn't exactly what you call exciting, but it was all I knew for my 17 years of existence. Our town had 3 stoplights, 1 grocery store, and about 5 churches. Everyone knew everyone's business, including the fact that I worked at gas and go after school while my 15-year-old sister Emmy sat at home scrolling through social media. The disparity between how my parents treated us became more obvious every day. I'd come home exhausted after a 6-hour shift, only to hear Mom yell from the kitchen that I needed to take out the trash before dinner. Meanwhile, Emmy would be sprawled across the couch, headphones in, completely oblivious to anything resembling responsibility. "Did you pay your part of the phone bill this month?" Dad would ask me while handing Emmy $20 for the mall without a second thought. That was our dynamic. I was the additional income, the extra pair of hands, the built-in handyman. Emmy was the princess who needed to be protected from the harsh realities of life, as Mom often said. Every night after finishing my chores and homework, I'd lock myself in our shared bedroom, which Emmy decorated entirely to her taste, and teach myself coding, JavaScript, Python, whatever free tutorials I could find online. The blue light from my secondhand laptop illuminated my face as I dreamed about Silicon Valley and startup culture, somewhere far away from cornfields and gas station hot dogs. My YouTube history was filled with tech entrepreneur stories and coding bootcamp reviews. I had a 5-year plan all mapped out: community college while working, then transfer to a tech-focused university, intern at a startup, and eventually launch my own company. The blueprint was clear in my mind. I'm thinking about applying to Iowa State for their computer science program, I mentioned one night during dinner, trying to sound casual despite my racing heart. The silence that followed was deafening. My fork clinked against the plate as I waited for anyone, to respond. Dad cleared his throat. "College costs money, son. Money we're setting aside for your sister's education fund." I froze mid-bite. "But I've been saving for my job. I could get scholarships, maybe loans." "Emmy's got real potential," Mom chimed in, squeezing my sister's shoulder. "Her art teacher says she could get into a good art school if she continues developing her talent." Emmy smirked at me across the table. "I've been contributing to household expenses for 2 years, I countered, feeling heat rise to my face. "Almost half my paycheck goes to bills. Couldn't some of that have gone toward my education fund?" Dad's expression hardened. "That money keeps a roof over your head. We're your parents, not your tenants. Your contribution is expected." The crushing weight of this revelation settled on my chest. There was no college fund for me. There never had been. While I handed over my paychecks, they'd been squirreling away money for Emmy's future, a future apparently more valuable than mine. That night, I scrolled through scholarship opportunities on my laptop, the blue light illuminating tears I refused to let fall. Through the thin wall, I could hear Emmy talking on the phone about the new iPad she was getting for her birthday next month. The same birthday month as mine, though nobody had mentioned any gifts coming my way. I clicked through images of college campuses that increasingly felt like distant planets. My savings account showed $2,340.12, nearly a year of careful saving after household contributions. A drop in the bucket for college tuition. The workload only increased as fall arrived. Dad had me helping with yard work on weekends. Mom needed me to drive Emmy to her friends' houses since she was too busy to do it herself, and my manager at gas and Go kept asking me to cover extra shift because I was reliable. No one seemed to notice that I was drowning. Meanwhile, Emmy floated through life. Her biggest concern was whether she should post her latest digital artwork to Instagram or TikTok first. When she got a B on a math test, Mom made her favorite dinner to cheer her up. When I made honor roll for the 3rd semester in a row, I got a nod and a keep it up. The ancient family vase sat prominently on our mantelpiece, a constant reminder of the family heritage that somehow seemed to flow through Emmy but bypassed me entirely. Mom would dust it carefully each week, telling Emmy stories about how it had been passed down for generations, eventually to be hers. I was never mentioned in these inheritance conversations. As October arrived, bringing colder weather and earlier sunsets, I felt increasingly invisible in my own home. My contributions were expected but not appreciated. My dreams were dismissed as unrealistic. My existence was tolerated rather than celebrated. The manager at Gas and Go, Dave, was one of the few people who actually saw me. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, kid," he'd say while we counted inventory. "Don't let this place become your forever, you hear me? You're meant for bigger things." Those small encouragements were lifelines in a sea of indifference. I clung to them during family dinners where Emmy dominated the conversation, and I became background noise. I repeated them to myself when Dad would critique how I fixed something around the house, never acknowledging that at least I tried. I had no way of knowing that everything would change on a rainy October evening when I was asked to stay late at work. No way of predicting that an extra hour of inventory would alter the course of my life forever. That walking home in the drizzle would lead me to a moment that would sever the last threads connecting me to the only family I'd ever known. I'd never forget that evening in October. The air had turned crisp, and rain clouds had been threatening all day while I worked my shift at Gas and Go. My manager, Dave, had asked me to stay an extra hour to help with inventory, which meant I'd miss a last bus and had to walk the 2 miles home. By the time I reached our neighborhood, my hoodie was damp from the light drizzle, and my stomach was growling from missing dinner. As I turned the key in our front door, I heard a loud crash from inside. Something heavy had shattered. My heart jumped into my throat. Our house was usually quiet this hour. I dropped my backpack in the hallway and rushed toward the sound, which seemed to be coming from the living room. When I got there, I froze in the doorway. My sister, Emmy, was standing in the middle of the room, her face pale as chalk. At her feet lay dozens of ceramic shards, the remains of Mom's antique vase that had always sat on the mantelpiece. That vase had been in our family for generations. Grandma had given it to Mom before she passed, and Mom treated it like a sacred relic. "What happened?" I asked, taking in the scene. Emmy just stared at me, her expression shifting from shock to something calculated. She remained silent for exactly 3 seconds. I counted them in the deafening quiet, before bursting into tears. "It was him," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He pushed me. I lost my balance and the vase fell." "What?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I literally just walked in the door. I wasn't even in here. But it was too late. The damage was done, both to the vase and to what little remained of my standing in this household. Mom and Dad rushed into the living room, drawn by Emmy's theatrical wails. Dad's eyes went from the shattered heirloom to my face, and I saw something harden in his expression. It wasn't just anger. It was hatred, a contempt that seemed to have been building for years, just waiting for a reason to surface. "This is the last straw," he said, his voice frighteningly quiet. "Get out of my house." I stood there among the broken pieces, watching as Emmy continued to sob and gnawed toward our parents, cementing her lie. Mom wouldn't even look at me, her gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. That's when it truly hit me. I didn't belong here. I never had. No one spoke as I went to my room and stuffed whatever clothes I could fit into my backpack. No one tried to stop me when I grabbed my laptop, and the $220 in emergency cash I kept hidden between my mattresses. Not even when I walked out the front door into the rain that had started coming down harder, matching the storm inside me. The door closed behind me with a dull thud that felt sickeningly final. I stood on the porch for a moment, raindrops mixing with the tears I couldn't hold back anymore. 17 years old, kicked out over a lie, with nowhere to go as night fell. My sister had just erased me from my own family, and my parents had let her. I started walking without direction, just needing to put distance between myself and that house. The rain soaked through my clothes, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing through options that all seemed equally bleak. I had some savings from my job, but not enough for an apartment or even more than a few nights at the cheapest motel in town. Everyone I knew lived with their parents. How could I explain suddenly needing a place to crash? The town single park came into view, its empty benches glistening under the streetlights. I sat down on a small pavilion, sheltered from the worst of the rain, and tried to think logically despite the anger and hurt consuming me. I needed a plan. I needed to survive. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably one of my couple friends wondering why I wasn't responding to our group chat. I couldn't bring myself to look at it. What'd I even say? Hey, guess what? My sister framed me for breaking a vase, and now I'm homeless? As the night grew darker and colder, I realized just how quickly your life can change. One minute you're walking home from work thinking about what leftovers might be in the fridge. The next you're calculating how many nights a cheap motel would cost, and whether you could convince your manager to let you work full-time while finishing your senior year. I pulled my damp hoodie tighter around me and watched the rain create puddles in the uneven pavement. Part of me wanted to march back home and demand justice, to make them see the truth, but I knew it wouldn't matter. They'd made their choice years ago about which child was worth believing, worth investing in, worth loving. The worst part? I wasn't even surprised. This moment had been building for years. Emmy's lie was just a match that finally lit the fuse. As I sat there alone in the darkness, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this forced independence was exactly what I needed to start building the life I actually wanted, not the one where I was always second best. My stomach growled again, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since lunch. I had to find shelter for the night and figure out what came next. With a deep breath, I stood up and shouldered my backpack, ready to face whatever waited for me in the rain-soaked darkness beyond the park. The rain eventually stopped around midnight, but the chill it left behind cut straight to my bones. The park bench had become increasingly uncomfortable as the hours passed, my backpack serving as a poor excuse for a pillow. Despite my exhaustion, sleep was impossible. Every sound in the darkness had me on edge. I kept thinking about how quickly my life had unraveled. Yesterday I had a home. Tonight, I was essentially homeless. As dawn broke, the sky turned a hazy purple-gray, and the first park joggers appeared in the distance. I sat upright, trying to look like someone who was just taking an early morning break rather than someone who had nowhere else to go. My back ached, my clothes were still damp, and the hunger from last night had evolved into a painful gnawing in my stomach. I counted the cash in my wallet again. $220 from my emergency stash, plus another $43 left from my last paycheck. Not enough for an apartment deposit, but maybe enough for a few nights somewhere warm while I figure out next steps. A rustling sound from nearby trash cans caught my attention. At first, I thought it was a raccoon, but then a man emerged. He looked to be in his 50s, with a salt and pepper beard and layers of mismatched clothes. He was carefully sorting through the garbage, occasionally putting something in the shopping cart beside him. Our eyes met, and I quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring. But instead of moving on, he approached me, his weathered face breaking into a surprising smile. "Rough night, kid?" he asked, his voice gentler than his appearance would suggest. I nodded, not sure what else to say. "Name's Ray," he continued, sitting down at the far end of my bench without waiting for an invitation. "Been watching you since sunrise. You don't look like you usually sleep rough." "I don't," I admitted. "First night, actually." Ray nodded knowingly. "Family troubles or job troubles? Those are usually the top two." "Family," I said, surprised at how easy it was to talk to this stranger. "They kicked me out last night." "Tough break," he said without prying further. "You got breakfast plans?" I shook my head. "There's a gas station about a block from here. Their coffee isn't half bad, and they've got those breakfast sandwiches that'll keep you going all morning." The mention of Gas and Go or any gas station made me wince. I couldn't go to mine. Day would ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. But I was starving, and coffee sounded like heaven right now. I was heading that way myself. Ray continued. No pressure, though. Something about his non-judgmental attitude made me decide to trust him. I grabbed my backpack and stood up. 20 minutes later, Ray and I sat on a curb outside a different gas station than my workplace, each with a coffee and a microwave breakfast sandwich. I'd paid for both, which seemed to surprise him. "Most people cross the street when they see me coming," he remarked between bites. I shrugged. "You're the only person who's talked to me since yesterday." Ray chuckled at that. "Been there, kid. First few days are the hardest. Then you start figuring things out. I'm not planning to be homeless long term." I clarified quickly, then immediately regretted how it sounded. "Sorry, I didn't mean—" "No offense taken," Ray said easily. "And I'm not what you'd call permanently homeless either. I'm more of a traveler. Been doing this for about 3 years now. He explained how he'd lost his job as a warehouse manager after the company downsized. Then his wife left, taking most of their savings. Rather than trying to rebuild in the same place with all those painful memories, he decided to start walking. He'd been to 17 states since then. I find things, he explained. Stuff people throw away that still has value. Fix it up, sell it, or trade it. It's not a bad life if you don't mind the weather. As if to demonstrate, Ray reached into his cart and pulled out various items. A slightly dented thermos, a Swiss Army knife missing one attachment, a pair of nearly new hiking boots that were just a bit too small for him. Each item had a story of where he found it and what he planned to do with it. My best find was about a month ago, he said, digging deeper into his cart. Some tech company must have done a clean out. Found a bunch of electronics in their dumpster. He pulled out what looked like an ancient laptop, scratched, dented, and missing several keys. Been using it as a coffee tray, he admitted with a laugh. Can't get it to turn on, and I don't have anywhere to plug it in anyway. But maybe you could use it for parts or something. You look like someone who might know about computers. I was about to politely decline. The thing looked at least 10 years old. But something stopped me. Maybe it was because Ray had been kind when I needed kindness. Or maybe it was because I couldn't bear to disappoint the first person who'd shown me any consideration in the last 24 hours. Thanks, I said, accepting the battered laptop. I appreciate it. Ray seemed pleased. Everything has value to someone. That's my philosophy. We finished our breakfast in comfortable silence. Ray gave me tips on safe places to sleep, and which fast food restaurants were lenient about people using their bathrooms to wash up. It was surreal getting this crash course in homelessness from a man who'd been a warehouse manager in his previous life. By mid-morning, I'd made a decision. I couldn't spend another night outside, not with October temperatures dropping into the 40s after sunset. I had to find somewhere to stay while I figured out my next move. There's a motel on Highway 9. Ray advised when I mentioned my plan. The Sunset Inn. Nothing fancy, but they do weekly rates that are better than nightly, and they don't ask too many questions if you pay cash. We parted ways after exchanging phone numbers. Ray had a prepaid cell he charged at the library. For emergencies, he explained. Or if you find something interesting in those dumpsters behind the mall. They throw out good stuff on Thursdays. The Sunset Inn was exactly as advertised, a one-story, L-shaped building with peeling paint and flickering neon. But the lobby was clean, and the elderly man at the front desk barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as I paid cash for 5 nights. No ID check. No questions about why a teenager needed a room in the middle of a school day. Room 18 was small and smelled faintly of cigarettes despite the no smoking sign. But it had a bed with clean sheets, a bathroom with hot water, and even a small microwave and mini fridge. After what felt like the longest shower of my life, I collapsed onto the bed, clean and warm for the first time in what felt like forever. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about Ray's parting words. Kid, whatever happened back there, it doesn't define you. What you do next does. I'd never expected wisdom from a man who lived out of a shopping cart, but there it was. What I did next would define me. Not Emmy's lies. Not my parents' betrayal. Not the years of being treated like I mattered less. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out what came next. I had a high school diploma to finish, a job I needed to keep, and apparently a broken laptop to tinker with. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was a beginning. My beginning. For the first time in my life, I would be defining my own path, not try to earn approval from people who would never give it. With that thought, I fell into the deepest sleep I'd had in years. 4 months can change everything. By February, I had settled into a routine that would have been unimaginable back in October. My home was now a tiny studio apartment on the east side of town, the kind of place my parents would have called sketchy, but to me, it represented independence. The rent ate up most of my paycheck, but having my own key to my own door was worth every penny. The apartment was barely 300 square feet. A main room with enough space for a futon that doubled as my bed, a rickety desk I'd found on the curb, and a kitchenette with 2 burners and a mini fridge. The bathroom was so small I could brush my teeth while showering. but it was mine. No one told me to clean up, no one complained about my late-night coding sessions, and no one made me feel like a boarder rather than family. I'd gotten lucky with my job situation. When I showed up for my shift the day after being kicked out, Dave took one look at my exhausted face and pulled me into the back office. "What happened?" he asked, and something about his genuine concern broke through my defenses. I told him everything: the vase, Emmy's lie, my parents choosing her version without question. I expected pity, maybe some awkward platitudes, but Dave surprised me. "Been wondering when they'd push you too far," he said. "Look, there's an opening for assistant manager. It's full-time, comes with a small raise. Hours would be tough with school, but if you're on your own now, might be worth considering." That conversation changed my trajectory. I dropped to part-time school, just enough classes to graduate, and took the assistant manager position. The extra income made the difference between homeless and housed. My high school counselor wasn't thrilled about my reduced course load, but when I explained my situation, she helped arrange a schedule that allowed me to attend morning classes and work afternoons and evenings. Some of my teachers even let me submit assignments online when I couldn't make it to class. I lost some friends in transition. Turns out people get weird when you can't hang out because you're working 60 hours a week to survive. But I gained something more valuable: respect for myself. Every bill I paid, every shift I completed, every problem I solved on my own was proof that I didn't need my family's approval to succeed. Ray and I still met occasionally for coffee. He'd check on me, making sure I was eating properly and not just surviving on gas station food. Sometimes he'd bring me small things he'd found: a slightly worn but perfectly functional desk lamp, a stack of programming books someone had discarded from the community college library. I'd try to give him money, but he always refused. "Just pay it forward someday, kid," he'd say, "when you're running your fancy tech company." One chilly February evening, after a particularly exhausting inventory shift, I remembered the old laptop Ray had given me months ago. It had been sitting in a plastic bag under my futon, forgotten in the chaos of establishing my new life. Curiosity, and a bit of nostalgia for the guy who'd helped me when I needed it most, made me dig it out. The thing was even worse than I remembered: an ancient ThinkPad with a cracked case, missing keyboard keys, and what looked like coffee stains on the trackpad. The battery was completely dead, of course, but the power port seemed intact, and I had a collection of adapters from fixing other people's electronics at work. After some trial and error, I found a power cord that fit. The laptop didn't immediately explode when I plugged it in, which I counted as a win. The charging light flickered weakly, suggesting that the battery might still take a charge. I left it plugged in while I heated up some ramen for dinner. An hour later, I pressed the power button without much hope. To my surprise, a dim glow appeared on the screen, gradually brightening to reveal a boot sequence that looked straight out of the early 2010s. "No way," I whispered as the ancient operating system slowly came to life. The previous owner hadn't even wiped the hard drive. A desktop appeared with a handful of folders and shortcuts. Most were typical: documents, downloads, pictures, but one folder name caught my eye: BTC_2010. I clicked on it, assuming it might be some old work files. Inside were just two items: a file labeled wallet, dat, and a text document named password.txt. My pulse quickened as I realized what I might be looking at. BTC, Bitcoin, from 2010, when it was worth practically nothing. With shaking hands, I opened the text file. It contained a single string of characters, a password, presumably for the wallet. I'd been teaching myself about cryptocurrency over the past few months, fascinated by the technology even though I couldn't afford to invest. I knew enough to understand what a wallet.dat file was and what it could potentially contain, but surely it would be empty. No one would forget about a laptop with actual Bitcoin on it. Even if there had been some coins on here years ago, the original owner must have transferred them long before tossing the laptop. Still, my curiosity wouldn't let it go. I spent the next 3 hours installing the software needed to check the wallet. The ancient laptop wheezed and struggled with each download, its fan running constantly like it might take flight. Finally, I got a compatible wallet program running and imported the old wallet file. entering the password from the text document. There was a long pause as the program synchronized with the network. I used the time to make more ramen and try to manage my expectations. Best case scenario, I thought there might be a fraction of a Bitcoin, maybe enough for a decent meal or some new clothes. When I returned to the desk, the sync was complete. I clicked to view the balance and nearly choked on my noodles. 217.4 BTC. I blinked hard, certain I was misreading. I refreshed the screen. The number remained unchanged. 217 Bitcoin. At the current rate of about $60,000 per Bitcoin, that was... I grabbed my phone with trembling hands to calculate. Over $13 million. This can't be real, I said aloud to my empty apartment. But the balance continued to stare back at me, unwavering. I spent the next hour verifying that what I was seeing was legitimate. I checked block explorers to confirm the wallet address and its balance. I researched when the coins had last moved. Not since 2011, it seemed. The original owner had either forgotten about them or lost access to them years ago, before Bitcoin had any significant value. And now, through a series of unlikely events, Emmy's lie, meeting Ray, his dumpster diving habits, his generosity to a homeless kid, those coins had found their way to me. The cosmic unlikelihood of it all made me dizzy. I closed the laptop and sat in stunned silence. $13 million. Enough to completely change my life. Enough to never worry about rent or tuition or medical bills again. Enough to start the tech company I dreamed about. Enough to never have to see my family again, or to buy their house out from under them if I wanted to be petty. But with that thought came a sobering realization. I needed to be careful. Very careful. Stories abounded of crypto millionaires being hacked, scammed, or worse. And I was particularly vulnerable. A barely 18-year-old living in a cheap apartment, with no financial advisor, no security, and no experience handling this kind of wealth. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with possibilities and dangers. By morning, I had the outline of a plan. I wouldn't tell anyone, not Dave, not my teachers, certainly not my family. I would move the coins gradually and securely, converting only what I needed for immediate use. I would finish high school, then carefully lay the groundwork for my future. As dawn broke over my tiny apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope without limits. The universe had handed me a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. Ray's words echoed in my head. Everything has value to someone. He couldn't have known how prophetic those words would turn out to be. Whatever karma he had accumulated in his wandering life, some of it had surely found its way to me. 1 year can transform a life completely. Mine went from sleeping on a park bench to running my own tech startup in downtown Des Moines. Looking at me now, dressed in business casual instead of a gas and go uniform, carrying a leather messenger bag instead of a beat-up backpack. Few would connect me to that desperate kid in the rain. I handled the Bitcoin with extreme caution. The day after my discovery, I went to the library and used their computer to research everything about securing cryptocurrency. I created multiple hardware wallets, splitting the coins between them for safety. I consulted with an attorney, telling him I had been investing in Bitcoin for years, about the legal implications of my newfound wealth. Only then did I cash out a small portion, just enough to rent a better apartment, buy a reliable used car, and enroll in coding courses at the community college. I gave notice at Gas and Go, explaining to Dave that a distant relative had left me some money. He seemed genuinely happy for me, though I could tell he didn't fully buy my story. "Whatever happened, you deserve it," he said during my last shift. "Just don't forget us little people when you're running Silicon Valley." I assured him I wouldn't. In fact, Dave became my first investor 6 months later when I launched ByteStep, a startup focused on developing affordable inventory management software for small businesses. His experience as a manager gave him insights that proved invaluable during development. My business plan was modest at first. I'd noticed how places like Gas and Go struggle with outdated inventory systems. So I created something better, streamlined, intuitive, and affordable. But word spread quickly, and within months, orders were coming in from across the Midwest. The growth required legitimate financing beyond my secret Bitcoin stash, which remained largely intact. I needed a real office, employees with skills beyond my own, and the appearance of normal business development. A venture capital firm in Chicago took interest, and their investment made my cryptocurrency wealth less suspicious. I now had a plausible explanation for my success. By the time I turned 19, I was employing 15 people and had moved into a downtown office space with exposed brick walls and those hanging light bulbs that startups seem obligated to have. Magazine profile described me as a wunderkind and the future of Midwest tech. None mentioned my family. I'd avoided thinking about them for months, channeling all my energy into building ByteStep. But occasionally, I'd catch myself wondering if they'd seen articles about me in the local business journal or heard through town gossip about my success. I found out one Tuesday morning in the most unexpected way. My HR director, Melissa, poked her head into my office. Just wanted to let you know, we have a promising candidate interviewing for the financial analyst position at 2. Her resume is impressive. Business degree from Iowa State. Internship at an accounting firm in Des Moines. I nodded, only half listening as I reviewed code on my laptop. Her name's Emmy Parker. Local girl, actually. My fingers froze over the keyboard. Emmy Parker? Yes, Melissa continued, oblivious to my reaction. From your hometown, I believe. Do you know her? I managed to keep my expression neutral. The name sounds familiar. I'd like to sit in on that interview, if you don't mind. Melissa looked surprised. I rarely participated in first-round interviews, but agreed. For the next 3 hours, I could barely focus on anything. My sister was about to walk into my company, apparently unaware that her estranged brother owned it. At precisely 2 o'clock, Melissa led a young woman into our glass-wall conference room. Through the transparent barrier, I could see my sister clearly. She looked older, more polished in her interview suit, but unmistakably Emmy. She hadn't noticed me watching from my office. I gave them 10 minutes before casually walking into the conference room with a manufactured excuse about needing some files. Emmy was mid-sentence when I entered. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to Melissa, then snapped back to me with dawning recognition. The color drained from her face. Sorry to interrupt, I said smoothly. Melissa, when you're finished, could I have a word with Miss Parker? I believe we're acquainted. Emmy looked like she might be sick. Melissa, sensing the sudden tension, wrapped up quickly and excused herself. For nearly a minute after she left, Emmy and I simply stared at each other across the conference table. You work here, she finally managed. I own here, I replied. Another long silence followed. I studied my sister, the person whose lie had inadvertently set me on this path. She looked both exactly the same and completely different. Still beautiful, still put together, but there was a new wariness in her eyes. I didn't know, she said finally. When I applied, I saw ByteStep, and the founder was listed as J. Parker. I thought it was a coincidence. J. Parker. I'd started using my first initial professionally to distance myself from my past. Apparently, it had worked too well. How are Mom and Dad? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Dad's business is struggling. Mom had some health issues last year. She hesitated. They don't talk about you. I nodded, unsure what I expected to feel at this news. Vindication? Sadness? Instead, I felt oddly hollow. And you? Iowa State Business Program? I guess they found the money for your education. She had the decency to look ashamed. I got a partial scholarship. They took out loans for the rest. A pause. I graduate next month. I reached into my desk drawer and took out a small box I'd been saving for a special occasion. It had cost me weeks of searching online auctions and antique shops, but I finally found one nearly identical to the vase she'd broken and blamed me for. I slid it across the table. A gift from the director. For your interview. Her hands trembled as she opened the box. Inside was a ceramic shard, just one piece of the replica vase I'd purchased and deliberately broken. Her eyes widened in recognition. Remember the vase you said I broke? I asked quietly. The one that got me thrown out? Emmy's eyes filled with tears. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and rushed out of the conference room. I watched through the glass walls as she hurried past curious employees and disappeared into the elevator. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. The moment I'd occasionally fantasize about had arrived and passed, leaving nothing but a conference room with an empty chair and a broken piece of ceramic. A week later, my cell phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I nearly declined it, assuming it was a spam call. But something made me answer. Hello? A long pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in over a year. Son, it's Dad. My heart hammered against my ribs. I said nothing, waiting. Emmy told us about your company, about seeing you. Another pause. I didn't know you'd become so successful. Of course. My success was what prompted this call, not concern for my well-being or regret over their actions. What do you want? I asked, keeping my voice level. I thought maybe we could talk. Clear the air. It's been a long time, and your mother, she misses you. The practiced evenness in his tone told me everything. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about whatever financial difficulties Emmy had mentioned. Dad, the proud man who'd thrown me out over a lie, was now reaching out because I might be useful again. I'm not holding a grudge. I said finally, but I'm not coming back either. You all made your choice that night. People make mistakes, he replied, a new urgency in his voice. We're family. That doesn't just disappear. It did for me, I said, the night you chose Emmy's lie over the truth. We eventually agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. When the day came, I arrived early, choosing a table with a clear view of the door. They entered together, Mom, Dad, and Emmy. They looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than in my memories. The conversation was strained, filled with awkward silences and carefully chosen words. Mom cried when she saw me, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I let her, though I felt nothing at the contact. Dad talked about water under the bridge and moving forward as a family. Emmy mostly stared at her coffee. No one apologized. No one acknowledged that they had believed a lie without question and discarded me like unwanted furniture. Instead, they asked about my company, my apartment, my journey to success, as Dad called it. Before we parted, Dad cleared his throat and mentioned his struggling construction business, hinting heavily that he could use an investment from someone who believed in family. Mom talked about medical bills. Emmy mentioned student loans. I listened to it all without comment. Then I told him I'd think about how I could help and would be in touch. We hugged awkwardly in the parking lot, a family tableau for any passerby to witness. But as I watched them drive away, I knew with perfect clarity that while I might offer some financial assistance, enough to ease their immediate burdens, I would never again be part of their family in any meaningful way. The broken trust could not be repaired with money or time or pretending the past hadn't happened. 3 days later, I arranged for a financial advisor to meet with my parents. I set up a modest trust to help with Mom's medical expenses and Dad's business debts. I even created a small fund to help Emmy with her student loans, not out of obligation, but to free myself from any lingering sense that I owed them something, that their approval still mattered. My real family had become the people who believed in me when I had nothing. Ray, who still didn't know about the Bitcoin and still refused my offers of an apartment, preferring his wandering lifestyle. Dave, who'd given me a chance when I needed it most. My employees, who respected me for my ideas rather than my bank account. A month after the coffee shop meeting, I received a text from Emmy. Thanks for the help with the loans. I'm sorry about everything. I really am. It was the first real acknowledgement of what she'd done. I didn't respond immediately. Some wounds heal slowly, if at all. But I saved the message, a small bridge across a chasm that might always separate us. In my downtown office, looking out at the Des Moines skyline, I sometimes think about how different my life would be if Emmy had told the truth that night, if my parents had believed in me just once. I might still be in that small town, working at Gas and Go, dreaming of a future that seemed impossibly distant. Instead, I was here, building something meaningful, surrounded by people who saw my value without needing to be convinced. The path had been harder, lonelier, but ultimately led to something genuine, something that was truly mine. And in the end, that made all the difference.